What happens when one of the world's most heavily sanctioned nations challenges one of the world's most heavily armed? On March 31st, 2025, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, didn't just warn the United States. He issued a bold statement. Speaking before thousands gathered for Eid prayers in Tehran, he said Iran is not seeking war, but if war arrives, the US will face severe consequences. With the US accusing Tehran of moving closer to developing nuclear capabilities, and Iran rejecting those claims, tensions have escalated, raising fears of a major conflict, potentially involving nuclear threats. The message was clear, the timing deliberate, and the audience global. Khamenei's words were not diplomatic. They were framed as a clear warning. This comes amid renewed tensions, following the return of Donald Trump to power, renewed threats of military action, and heightened concern over uranium enrichment, reportedly approaching weapons-grade levels. The situation resembles a high-stakes game of nuclear brinkmanship. To understand Iran's tone in 2025, one must consider years of strained US-Iran relations. Tehran's stance is shaped by a decade of events that, in its view, undermine diplomacy, including targeted killings, broken agreements, and a history of perceived humiliation by Western powers. A major turning point for Iran was the US drone strike in 2020 that killed General Qasem Soleimani, a top commander of Iran's Quds force, while he was in Baghdad. The strike, carried out without a formal declaration of war, had a profound impact on Iran's strategic outlook. While the leadership mourned publicly, Iran's military strategy reportedly evolved, viewing future retaliation as a matter of timing and method, not immediate confrontation. Iran also began to rely more on alliances with non-state actors, framing them not just as proxies, but as integral parts of a broader defense network. This approach was shaped not only by the Soleimani incident, but also by the collapse of the 2015 nuclear deal, JCPOA. The deal, initially brokered under the Obama administration, offered Iran relief from sanctions in exchange for limits on its nuclear program. For a time, Iran complied, but hopes for lasting cooperation were dashed when President Trump withdrew from the agreement in 2018. That decision, made unilaterally and without consensus from international partners, was followed by the reimposition of heavy sanctions that further damaged Iran's economy. In Iran's view, these events shaped a belief that offers of peace from Washington were not genuine. Consequently, Iranian officials became more skeptical of diplomatic outreach, viewing it as potentially deceptive. When Trump sent a new ultimatum in 2025, Khamenei appeared unmoved. To Iran's leadership, the message seemed familiar and unconvincing. But there's another layer to Iran's current stance, a perceived shift in regional dynamics. Over the past 3 years, Iran has strengthened ties with countries like Russia and China, as well as regional allies such as Syria and Iraq. With US attention increasingly focused on China, Iran sees itself as part of a growing network of partners that can challenge American influence. Iranian officials argue that US threats are becoming less effective, not just because they are repeated, but because they are seen as harder to enforce. For example, when US bombers fly towards strategic locations like Diego Garcia, some in Iran interpret the move not as strength, but as a sign of pressure. When Trump speaks of overwhelming force, Iranian analysts reportedly compare it to past rhetoric that didn't result in military action. In Tehran's current perspective, the cost of a full-scale US strike may be too high, even for a confrontational administration. For the first time in years, Iran isn't merely responding to US actions. It appears to be actively shaping the psychological landscape. Here's a quick reminder to like and share the video and subscribe to our channel for more content on Africa's geopolitics, economy, and evolving dynamics. Now let's continue. Khamenei's speech, which made international headlines, contained significant psychological messaging. By suggesting that American military action was unlikely, he effectively questioned the credibility of the US threat, a rare move in military communication. Typically, nations emphasize enemy threats to justify defensive measures. Iran, in contrast, seemed to downplay the likelihood of US intervention, projecting confidence in its own deterrent capabilities. This wasn't necessarily arrogance. It appeared to be a strategic message. More notably, Iran's rhetoric isn't directed only at the United States. It's also aimed at the global South. As some countries in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia express frustration with perceived US dominance, Iran is attempting to position itself as a symbol of resistance, portraying itself as resilient despite challenges. While this can be seen as political messaging, it also serves as a form of soft power outreach. Each time Iran resists US pressure and continues to function, it signals to others that the current global power dynamics can be questioned. So, when analysts suggest that nuclear weapons might be part of Iran's strategy, they often mean that Iran may view peace with the US as increasingly unlikely. This may lead Iran to believe that its survival could depend on heightened deterrence. The long-standing pattern, where the US acts and others absorb, may no longer be assumed. Iran appears to be shifting the dynamics through its nuclear posture. Iran's nuclear program has evolved into something more complex than a straightforward weapons pursuit. It now serves as a strategic tool, a deterrent, a bargaining chip, a boundary, and a calculated risk. What once seemed like uranium enrichment now reflects entrenchment. After years of negotiating with Western nations, experiencing sanctions, shifting expectations, and occasional military threats, Iran no longer approaches uranium as just a fuel. It uses it symbolically. Each level of enrichment now sends a message. For example, 3.67% enrichment was associated with diplomacy, while 20% represented escalation. These percentages speak in a geopolitical language, and many are listening closely. According to a recent report by the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, Iran's uranium stockpile has grown significantly beyond the typical needs for civilian energy purposes. However, Iran appears to believe it no longer needs to justify its actions, particularly in a system where compliance may still lead to punitive measures. Instead, Iran is reportedly pursuing a strategy referred to by some analysts as a nuclear ambiguity trap, enriching uranium to a level just below weapons grade, avoiding an explicit breakout but keeping the possibility within reach. This tactic forces international observers into constant uncertainty, slowing diplomatic progress and shifting the balance of power. Iran is not explicitly declaring its intentions, but is applying pressure through ambiguity. This strategy has been years in the making. Iran has adopted a method known as escalation with deniability. It pushes boundaries, but avoids outright provocations that could trigger open conflict. It builds hardened facilities, relocates centrifuges, and trains personnel to respond tactically. Meanwhile, its public messaging is carefully controlled. We're not seeking a bomb, we're seeking sovereignty. In this narrative, nuclear capability isn't about using the bomb, it's about preventing war. Iran argues that the threat of severe retaliation is its best defense against forced regime change, drawing lessons from US interventions in Iraq, Libya, and Afghanistan. From this view, nuclear ambiguity is a shield, not only of protection, but of independence from foreign interference. As of 2025, this approach seems to have matured. The 2015 nuclear agreement, JCPOA, is no longer functioning, and trust is severely eroded. Even remaining European signatories, Britain, France, and Germany, are reportedly concerned. Iran hasn't expelled international inspectors, but it has limited their access in subtle but significant ways, turning off cameras, delaying visits, and reclassifying sites. What started as a transparent program is now more opaque, yet there appears to be an even broader strategy. Iran isn't only building nuclear capacity, it is trying to make it feel inevitable. In state media, nuclear progress is not framed as a race for arms, but as a matter of national pride, scientific advancement, and resistance. The story being told is clear and powerful. The West,